Assalamu alaikum, girls. Welcome to the third week of term 3. Inshallah, this week will be an interesting one for you. The lesson we have for you this week is on input and output devices. So let's get straight into it. The objectives of this week's lesson is that we need to recognize what's the purpose of input and output devices. We are going to list some examples of input and output devices. And given a device, we will have the ability to classify as input or output. Make sure that before you start this lesson, you have a quiet space. Better to wear earphones to have a better clarity of voice. Make sure you have downloaded the task sheet from Edmodo and you fill your name and class in it. Your task sheet will look like this. Fill your name and class over here. Okay, now let's back to our lesson. I'm going to show you a set of pictures and we are going to label the input devices as green and the output devices as red. Take a moment, pause this video and think which will be input and which will be output. Alright, at least most of you should have got this right. The keyboard, yes, it's an input device. So is the digital camera, so is the remote, and the game controller and the microphone, mouse are all input devices. Whereas you can see the monitors, the two kinds of monitors, the speaker, the headphones, and the printer are all output devices. Alright, you were able to make most of these guesses from your previous knowledge, but today we are going to learn some new concepts in input and output devices as well. So from our discussion so far, let's try to formally define what are input devices and what are output devices. We know and we can see that input devices are those devices which help to put digital information into the computer. So the information is going from outside the real world to inside the computer. This is the key word here. What the input device does is it helps to put your data from a physical format to a digital format. For example, we can also see that input devices are actually of two types. Input devices can either be a manual entry input device or it can be a direct data entry input device. So what does this really mean? A manual entry input device is where the user is manually entering the data. You can see this is the keyword here. For example, a keyboard or a mouse. In a keyboard, you as a user, you are typing the keys manually and you are making the data manually enter into the computer. In that case, what's a direct data entry input device? These are input devices where the data is entered semi-automatically or fully automatically into the computer. You can see this in use in retail shops, industrial systems, and so on. Let's look at some examples of both so that this is clear for you. For example, a keyboard. A keyboard is an example of a manual entry input device. Why? Because you are, as a user, entering the input into the computer manually. And we know that keyboard is used to enter any kind of data into application which consists of text, numbers, and so on. Another example of a manual entry input device is a numeric keypad. You must have seen this in ATMs when you are trying to withdraw cash from the ATM. This allows you to enter only numbers. This is another example of a manual entry device because you as a user, you are manually entering the input. Another example of a manual entry input device is a touchpad. A touchpad is the input device used on a laptop and it is used as a pointing device here instead of your mouse. As you can see, all these devices require the user to enter the data manually. What are some other examples of manual entry input device we can think of? Another example is a joystick. A joystick is used to put input data in for games and simulations. You must have seen this if you are playing some video games at home. Joysticks are very useful. Another example of a manual entry input device is a webcam. Webcam is generally used by users who want to have a video conference on the web, on Skype, Zoom, Google Duo, and so on. Generally, these days, webcams are integrated into the laptop you are using. A microphone is another example of a manual entry input device. It is used to input sound into the computer. So you speak into it and the sound is input into the computer. As you can see, this is also manual. You as a user is entering this data manually. You need to keep something in mind. There is a misconception that students often categorize CDs, USBs, SD cards, all memory cards as input device. In fact, these are not input devices because the data already is in a digital format in these devices. So please do not classify these as input device, but these are actually storage devices which will come up later. Now what we will do is go to our task sheet and complete task 1 from the task sheet. So pause the video now and complete this task. Alright, you must be done with task 1 now if you've come back. Let's continue our lesson. Now that we've looked at manual entry input devices, what are the examples of direct data entry input devices that we have? Two examples are shown here. One is a barcode reader. You must have all seen the barcodes that you have on different products at the supermarket. And this is the barcode reader which is used by the cashier usually to scan this barcode and enter this scanned barcode into the computer. So here you can see the cashier is not typing these numbers into the computer. Rather, this is an automatic process. This is why we call it a direct data entry device. Another example of a direct data entry input device is a magnetic strip reader. If you've stayed at hotels, you would know that hotels usually give you a hotel card which have a magnetic strip on it. It usually looks black in color like this. Or if you have a card for an ATM, this will also have a magnetic strip on it. You are not as a user manually entering this data into the computer, but rather the data on this magnetic strip is getting automatically entered into the computer as you swipe on this magnetic stripe reader. This is why both of these are examples of direct data entry input devices. Alright, let's pause here and try to complete task 2 of our task sheet. Task 2 is to answer true and false for the statements given here. Please pause the video. Alright girls, if you are back, then you must be done with task 2 of your task sheet. Let's continue. Now that we've looked at input devices and understood what they do and the two types they have, let's look at what are output devices. Output devices are those devices which help to send information out of the computer. This is the key word here. The information is originally inside the computer and then output device lets you have the information outside of it. So what are some examples? A speaker is a good example of an output device because the sound from inside the computer is allowed to come outside. A monitor is another good example of an output device because whatever apps you have, whatever information you have, the monitor displays it. A projector is another example of a good output device because whatever is on your monitor, it is being projected out onto a flat surface using a projector. As we can see, all these devices help us to output data. Another example of an output device is a printer. A printer is useful because it helps us print pictures and documents on hard copy paper, which is clearly an example of an output device. Now there is a special device which is actually an example of both input device and output device, and this is your touchscreen. Touchscreens of your laptops, touchscreen of your smartphone, tablets, etc. Why is this special? Because it is both an input device and an output device. What is the input here? That when you touch on the screen, it helps you to enter your clicks and other data into the computer. And how is it an output? Because it works like a monitor. You are displaying or viewing the data on the screen. So the best example for a device that is both input and output is a touchscreen. Now let's go on and complete the task 3 and 4 from your task sheet. Both task 3 and 4 are match the following. To complete the two tasks, you can insert some shapes and lines and use it to complete your match the following. Pause this video and come back when you're done. If you've come back, then you must be done with task 3 and 4. So let's just recap all we've done today. We learned today that input devices help us to put information into the computer. We also learned that output devices help us to send information out of the computer. And we also learned that input devices have two categories. They can either be manual entry input device where the data is entered manually into the computer, or they can be direct data entry input device where the data is entered automatically into the computer. Alright girls, as plenary for today's lesson, make sure you've completed all the 4 tasks in the task sheet. After completing today's lesson, if you feel that you want to make some changes to your answers, please do so and then upload your completed task sheet on Edmodo. That's all for today. Have a nice day ahead of you.